We're pumping and streaming live. Hey, everybody, Robert Phoenix here. We got Thor down in the bottom part of the screen, Mr. Steve Mercer. And then over here in the left part of the Saturnian square, we've got Sayer G. What's going on, man?
Hey, just so happy to be here with you. I just have loved your work and you've helped me out a lot navigating my life. So, yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, this is kind of homecoming day for both you and Sharon, who's going to be on an hour too. It's very rare that my guests have also been my clients. So this is, I think, a kind of a first for this show and for me anyway. So you're a parent, right? You're a parent, householder, husband, dealing with sort of the stress of coronavirus and what's going on. How are you holding up with just the kind of the topical stuff that everybody else is going through right now?
It's a great question. I think this is quite an opportunity for us all to get intimate with fears and a lot of things that have come up for us, and to connect to the fact that this is a global experience we all now have. So there is a point of empathic merger there. But I will say that for me, I think I've been waiting for this my whole life. And, I've always had an anxiety that this was going to drop. I didn't know how, but I was preparing. For years I studied vaccines and, the sort of merger of the military and medical industrial establishments. And I think what we're seeing right now is really an international coup happening on primarily an ideological level, meaning germ theory was weaponized. And now everyone in the world, everything in the world is preempted by this sort of memeplex of, we have to be terrified by invisible particles that, by the way, happen to be part of the natural human virome. But none of that science is being spoken to. So I'm in the middle of trying to, unpack that. I'm doing a lot to try to educate around the statistics that are being, offered as, reason to be freaking out. And now we see a lot of those original projections were absolutely false, designed to manufacture fear and consent. And now there's a good number of people rising up. So I actually feel really good about where we're at this moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is a really, really interesting time. And, you mentioned that you've been preparing for this moment for most of your life. And in my own way, I feel very, very similar. And I know that a lot of other people who are kind of tapped in to this nexus point of awakening are feeling something similar as well. Like we're all kind of waking up either simultaneously or we've been in training for this. And it's not just people that are, that we would consider to be part of our circle. Like, of course, the big news here in Texas is Shelley Luther, the woman who had the salon, who said, I'm going to open my salon regardless. I need to. My people that work for me cannot feed their kids. I can't feed my kids. So she went up against the state mandate, not the law, by the way, but a mandate that she was going to open her salon. Of course, she was ultimately arrested, went before a judge, and the judge, the Sanhedrin, that's what the role he was playing. He was like the Sanhedrin. And he said, I'll let you off if you apologize for being unsafe and being individualistic and not caring about other people. And she refused. And so he sentenced her to 7 days in jail with a $7,000 fine. So I thought the number 7 was quite interesting. But all of a sudden, she's got like $500,000 now or close to it in a GoFundMe account.
Wow.
She was basically pardoned by the governor and by the attorney general, the lieutenant governor here in Texas. And all of a sudden, this I saw her on Sean Hannity last night, very emotional. Had real, you could tell that this was nothing she'd pre-planned or done for any kind of celebrity. Yeah. Like the thing really hit her like a sonic blast. Wow. But what it did is this judge played right into this moment of awakening by forcing her to do these things. It had the reverse effect. And now somebody who's a salon owner in Dallas is part of this ever widening circle of people that are part of the awakening.
Wow. That's amazing, actually. And, happening right now during a full moon in Scorpio, this intense moment. I know that's your realm, but I will say that it's something of an ontological speciation event where you have one side, right, that is wearing masks, that is reiterating the narrative that is baseless when you look at the actual science, presumed science behind these forms of non-pharmaceutical intervention, if you will, like social distancing. And then you have the other side, which is those folks that are actually seeing it for what it is. And it's a really, in a way, concerning development that we have, this ontological chasm now between individuals that have drank the Kool-Aid and those who are seeing what's happening. In other words, okay, there are those who are frightened to death at the prospect of this invisible particle out there. And then there are those who are equally frightened at the fascist boot dropping on the necks of everyone. Right? And so that's a point of connection. And Kelly has helped me to understand this, my wife, because she does so much work here and understanding her own shadow. And ultimately, like her and I, we've been kind of freaking out and, wielding our swords and running into battle and in a way creating more divisiveness and fear. And so that's not the answer either. Even though it's scary, both sides of the equation, we have to kind of take it as an opportunity, to evolve.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting statement that you just brought to the table. A few weeks ago, I was talking about Akira Kurosawa's kind of vision of evil and heroism, right? And in the Kurosawa landscape, the villain always arrives as a kind of a set entity. Like the villain or evil does not evolve, but the hero evolves, right? So what you're saying speaks to that theorem, is that the act of heroism also includes the act of evolving and being able to rise to the occasion and to meet the challenge. So you're clearly articulating the path of the hero according to Kurosawa.
Well, I love that too, because you have this notion of the chrysalis and in a way, pulverization of our former self into these imaginal cells. And what a poetic, accurate description, because they become the butterfly. And it's a terrifying experience to be in this meat grinder. The transition is as real as a pregnant woman about to crown. You want to rip someone's head off, the hormones and the awareness. And we all are now in this almost ayahuasca-like ceremony where we're like throwing up and, shitting our diapers, right? Our spiritual diapers. And, ultimately, some of us who anticipated it, we've already been living in that. And there's a number of people that were somewhat elated, including Bill Gates, of all people. Why was he so excited?
Oh, he's having a great old time, man.
I mean, he's not really hiding it, and I have to give them credit, because if you think about what they accomplished, this was bloodless, like closure of the entire world. This is like equivalent to World War III as far as the info war. They totally created a prison planet out of the situation. It's like people like Alex Jones have been vindicated, in his hyperbole. But the reality is that now we can wake up together, hopefully, in a way we wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
Right. Yeah, I think that's perfectly put. The other thing that's really kind of struck me as this dynamic that's unfolding is that you have people like Fauci and Birx and, of course, Gates, and they're these kind of really dark high priests of science, right? They're the dark high priests. And then you have this other group that's emerging, people like yourself, Dr. Buttar, Judy Mikovits, was it Dr. Erickson from Bakersfield? And this is like the healer as warrior, right? So we have these medical practitioners, medical doctors who are forking off from being sort of the dark high priest and really going forward and moving into the fray with information and conviction and standing up against these Sith lords. And I think that's a really interesting development, because it's this kind of merger of the warrior with body consciousness and healing and protection and caring. And I think you really are kind of a tip of the spear with that. What are your thoughts around kind of what you guys are doing in terms of coming online in this way?
Well, it's so interesting that you say that. I mean, I agree. It's like I look at people like Gates and Fauci, and I can do it with some compassion, honestly, because I feel like they're not the perfect embodiment of evil. It's very, but what they're doing is helping us to really rally our own equivalent global, sort of like, heroic energy in a way that otherwise wouldn't be true. So, but as far as what I feel needs to happen is less about, as my friend Joel Bohemia says, egos and logos, myself included, and more about people like yourself, myself, well, meaning the selfless self. Anybody can stand up now and go to a park and walk through a caution tape, and they can end up in jail, or they could be the living embodiment of the Constitution in that moment. They could be the most radical activists that ever walked the earth by simply breathing without a mask on. It's like going to the beach. I mean, they've created the consenting to the system, dropping this hammer on all of us is probably the most remarkable, horrific, and awe-inspiring event that I think has happened here, is that they were able to show us how dependent we are on the system. Well, we'll do practically anything they say and even love them for it, as they're taking away our freedom, so to speak. But we're the ones actually who are consenting, and that's what they're showing us.
Well, we're going to get into the whole topic of consent a little bit later on, but I wanted to dive into the coronavirus as sort of this theoretical biological entity. About a month ago, we had Dr. Andrew Kaufman, another warrior medic, on the show, and he really got into this idea of exosomes, electrification, toxicity, excretion of the cells, all that stuff, right? So people are trying to get educated about what a virus is and what a virus isn't. Let's throw 5G on top of that, which of course you cover on your website, and let's try to dive down into this whole corona phenomenon. What are your findings, and what are you pulling back from this, and how are you dissecting what we're dealing with from a physical level, not a political or psychological level?
Great question. So I feel like I've come to a point where I have to acknowledge that mutually exclusive narratives can be true, even though that sounds like a complete contradiction, right? Like Aristotelian logic, A cannot be not A. Like this violates that. But what I'm saying is, yes, there could be a bioweapon that was released intentionally or unintentionally in Wuhan, or there could have been a zoonosis event where there's a crossover with the wet markets with a bat, etc. Even though for millions of years these sorts of events preceded that didn't happen then. So, and there's the reality, which is that viruses are not what we have been led to believe. They have no intrinsic motive force. They're obligate parasites at best. Parasites sort of implies some agency, but they are pieces of genetic information that are able to pretty much move freely between organisms, within organisms. They are essential actually to our very species definition because they constitute the largest part of the microbiome, the virome. There's trillions of viruses that are essential in maintaining this infinitely complex homeostatic miracle of the body, which includes other germs like bacteria, fungi, etc. So once we came through the event horizon around 2000 of understanding that we're primarily germ, you look anywhere in the body, I mean, the genome, as far as protein coding genes, is probably about 11% retroviral in origin. Placenta would not exist without retroviral genes. And the idea is that so much of what we are, the mitochondria were once bacteria outside the cell, would not exist if it weren't. So how can we then allow us to think that these invisible particles, again, that happen to naturally exist in the human virome, there's over 100 coronaviruses identified, would have such a power to just kill us? This is vectors of inexorable lethality, when in fact, they're essential for adapting to our environment and creating resilience within the body. So yes, it's a great idea if you're creating a viral false flag. And so the effects of toxicant exposure, biological incompatibilities with, fake food, EMF exposure, causing cell death. And what you have here is the perfect fall guy. Oh, it's a virus. It's not the 5G tower we put up. It's not the fact we've been poisoning you for 20 generations. It's this thing that only we know exists with our scrying, with our priest-like abilities, and that, you have to do what we say or you're all going to die. It's just the most effective geopolitical takeover of the planet possible. And if you look at the origin of germ theory, you have to go back to the Third Reich. And there's such an interesting historical, unbroken continuity with Project Paperclip. And you go back and you look at how this was always devised to control populations, just as Foucault said. Medicine is here to control bodies. It's not to save people. It's not even really primarily to profit anymore, as you can see. They destroyed the entire global economy over this psyop. It is to control.
Yeah. Wow. That is mind-blowing and broad in its sort of capacity and scope in a kind of evil way. But so what is the consensus here now? I mean, we've got Kaufman coming out and saying, well, this could happen. We've got the guys from Bakersfield coming out and saying, well, this isn't really, working. The stats and the data, they don't seem to correlate. So what's the animal that we're really dealing? Is there a there, or is there no there, and it's really just a mind virus?
It's both, is my opinion. So in this country, it's primarily a mind virus, a media virus, a psychological operation. But it doesn't mean that they wouldn't potentially introduce a quasi-deadly virus or exosome. I think that's possible because in the sense that several years ago, they synthesized an infectious polioviral particle in a lab, and it was a big deal because it implied you can't really eradicate polio, which the Gates Foundation has been trying to say they've taken credit for years. Because you can't eradicate germs. You can't eradicate viruses. We are viruses. We are germs. And this premise that is the point, is universal vaccination against any threat, is such a powerful psychological operation. So when Fauci published in the New England Journal of Medicine less than a month ago his editorial looking at the stats for case fatality rates with coronavirus at that time, it was amazing. He admitted that it's about 0.1%, which is about what a seasonal flu is. He said it himself. This is the very man that was, proclaiming, according to the false estimates of the Imperial College, March 14th, before they shut the country down, because they said Trump had to do it or everyone's going to die, 2.2 million people. He himself in this journal said that this is not true. And you can't make this stuff up. People who suck on the teeth of CNN or ABC or wherever they get their mainstream media, okay? That is the problem, because that is how they took over this country and the world, but primarily this country.
Right. Yeah. I think the polio crisis or the polio epidemic, theoretically in the 40s and the early 50s, has a lot of interesting clues for the time that we're in now. And I'm not an expert on the conditions that led up to polio, but there seems to be a very strong link between spraying DDT on crops and the damage that DDT was doing to people from a cellular level, and this occurrence of so-called polio. Have you gleaned any insider information by going down the polio rabbit hole? And if so, what are the correlations between then and now?
It's a great question. Yes, absolutely. There was the introduction of DDT. It was good for you, right? They marketed it. They would spray it on children, and they didn't realize so much later it was actually quite deadly. So at the time, there were cases of individuals exhibiting what seemed like conventional polio-induced nerve death when it was in fact poisoning. And at the same time, you had basically a scaling down of infectious diseases of this order because of the improvements in sanitation, hygiene, nutrition, etc. So, and there was a reclassification of certain polio-like symptoms as new novel diseases in a way to cover up and make it seem as if the vaccines were doing a better job than they were, if at all. In fact, they were inducing, I believe, polio because they were live polio vaccines. So it's complex, but as far as what you're pointing out, yes, there's always an environmental, medical context, which needs to be looked at. And the basis of gene-based and germ-based views is to completely obviate, obfuscate the primary conditions, which are nutrition, environmental factors, spiritual, emotional, geopolitical, EMF related, that we all know causes disease. And it's meant to cover that up. Oh, it's in your genes. Oh, it's a new novel virus that you need to take this vaccine for, etc. This is basically, modern medicine has become a psychological operation. It is not any longer validated by the new biology and the new physics. So I think that's really why this is so egregious, because those who've taken, just even a cursory look at the literature can see that the emperor wears no clothes. There's actually nothing to base this on other than one thing, which Andrew and I have talked about, is that what can look like toxicant exposure, infectious disease can be misleading, because exosomes can induce the symptoms of toxicant exposure that look very much like flu or viral infection in those who are exposed. And it's a means to protect individuals within a species. It's a way of communicating information to encourage detoxification. And so it looks like a particle here that's a virus went here and caused disease. But it's like, I can get deeper into it. I have in another talk, but it's basically saying, yes, there appears to be basic infection when in fact it's a xenohermetic protective response related to toxicant and EMF exposure, and even psychogenic induced illness. Because if you believe that you're going to die, you believe a particle's infected you, the power of the mind and body and spirit, and I don't need to tell you this, is so profound that you could literally die just from believing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell people about why Bill Gates's idea for his specific vaccine is so dangerous?
Oh, such a great question. Well, first of all, it takes about a decade normally to properly create a vaccine as far as proving efficacy and safety. And then often there's post-marketing surveillance, which shows later that, at best, only 1% of the adverse effects are even being acknowledged. So vaccines have a very bloody, devastating history, which is represented by the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Fund, enacted through Congress in 1986, which has paid out over $4 billion to families who have had dead or irreversibly injured children from vaccines. So it's not a conspiracy theory to point that out. It's just the government saying that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. So when it comes to Gates, what he's done is invest in the very category of experimental vaccine that is known as transhumanistic, because it requires that we alter the structure and function of either the RNA systems in the body or the DNA. Now, it was believed for some time by focusing on RNA that the changes wouldn't be transmitted down the progeny line. That's not true. Unfortunately, we know now through exosomes that somatic cells can communicate directly to germline cells, and therefore changes in our body cells right now from any exposure can be passed on forever down the line. So what essentially is being done is, and he literally said this in Gates' notes a week ago, is that your body will be turned into a vaccine manufacturing plant. So we're talking about something so egregious and is such a clear violation of our species that you can't make this stuff up.
Right. That's like, so the vaccine theoretically will go into the RNA and wind up producing an exosome crisis for as long as you're alive, right? I mean, this is really what's going to happen.
Oh, well, so there's so many ways of looking at this. Initially, they tried to produce vaccines from cancer cells and realized there could be an oncogenic factor. So they took animal cells instead, which is what Mikovits pointed out recently and in all their work. Animal cells, though, happen to have oncogenic viral components and or DNA. So when you make vaccines that way, they surreptitiously go into your vaccine. That's why Paul Offit's Rototech, which he has a patent on, even though he's supposedly an expert on the safety of these vaccines, a huge conflict of interest, contains at least 2 simian retroviruses, which have probably infected millions just in that one vaccine. So then they decided, oh, that's unsafe. So let's try to attenuate that, destroy or weaken the virus. And that still doesn't work, obviously. So then they created another kind called capsid surface antigen, where they're not taking the whole virus or germ, and they're just taking a little piece to try to trick the body. That caused even more side effects and deaths, et cetera. So they're like, forget that. Now they're going to try to alter the DNA or RNA within the body, which you can't do that with. You tug on a little string, and it's like, what is it, Indira's web? It's like every string in the universe is tugged. they don't get it. We are open access, horizontally information transferring entities, and they are playing God, of course, as usual, and they may the unintended or the intended effect may be to forever change us in a way that could be potentially fatal, honestly. And in fact, that's the whole key, right? Is that when you look at the backstory of Gates and the Gates Foundation and his father being on the board of Planned Parenthood, and you look at some of the statements he's made from TED Talk to interviews about depopulation, and you look at evidence that they put in human gonadotropin hormone within vaccines so that it would create anti-fertility effects. This is part of an agenda that is not about saving lives, obviously. In fact, it targets reproduction. That's why he funded GMO terminator seeds, for example, that would destroy an ability of a plant to reproduce so they could control life. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we are being fed shadow, a very, very dark manifestation of the shadow. And this is part of the graduation process, right? I mean, this is when, theoretically you get to a certain stage and you got to take on the master, right? You've got to take on the master. You've got to take on the dark master in order to kind of get through this and then get to the next level. And we're entering the octagon right now. Have you and Kelly suffered any censorship through YouTube with any of your videos?
Interestingly, not yet, but we've definitely dealt with deplatforming and censorship. She more on Instagram, me more on Pinterest and Google. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are seeing this right now, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. You ever get into Sri Aurobindo at all? Do you know that guy?
Sri, did you say?
Aurobindo. He was a guru right around the same time as Yogananda.
Oh.
So Aurobindo was really into the body and particularly like the cells and cellular structure. And he had a student called Sat Prem, who also did a lot. That might be an interesting kind of vector for you and other people who are interested in the convergence of kind of the transcendental tradition and the deep dive into the body. And it might provide us with some interesting ideas and talking points on the spiritual theater of the body. Well, yeah.
Well, you've given me some thoughts there because, I always like to see how when I project the shadow and I think about how nefarious Gates might be, and I think more about how I might be participating in those things in my own life, the things I support, the things I buy. If they say I shop from Amazon, I can't complain when they're trying to vaccinate me on my doorstep because, they fund the CDC Foundation. They're, a part of this whole thing. But I think that maybe people like Gates feel that they're acting in a transcendent way, and that's what transhumanism is. And they're, paternalistically trying to save us from ourselves. And I think, that's something to look at. But anyway, just thought.
I want to give people a tour of your website. It's a really incredible compendium of health and articles surrounding health. So Sayer's got a new book out called Regenerate, Unlocking Your Body's Radical Resilience Through the New Biology, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But there's so much more. All these articles on grapeseed, reducing blood pressure, oligosaccharides, and why we need to add them. It just goes on and on. There's stuff around 5G, Taiwan giving us a very different kind of model to deal with coronavirus or whatever this thing is. The benefits of coffee. I really like that one because I
like coffee too.
So this is a really great resource. If you haven't discovered his website, you've got to check this out. So one of the things we were going to talk about a little bit is the whole 5G thing.
Yes.
And it's a big deal. I think it's a big deal. I know a lot of other health practitioners, and people need to understand this is not going to just be 5G. It'll be 6G. It'll be 7G. They've got all these other rollouts for this technology. But let's start here. And Sayer, what are your kind of initial thoughts, and how do you break this new radical entity that's been introduced into our environment?
Yeah, so we're running a free summit that has 40 of the best, experts in terms of PhD scientists, et cetera, on 5G, because I got into this because of my friend Josh Del Sol, who did the documentary Take Back Your Power on smart meters. And he helped me understand that because data is more valuable than oil right now, which incidentally, the Rockefellers just eschewed all their holdings last week, because I think there's an acknowledgement of where we're moving in this moment. It's about data and surveillance, et cetera, that's what it's about. Why is it valuable that they put these devices in our home to measure our behaviors, et cetera? It's because that's the new model. It's total, complete, surveillance of everything and everyone to control, just like we're seeing in China. And in order to execute that, we need higher bandwidth. So it's not for streaming videos. It's so that they can create the Internet of Things, tie every single piece of equipment together, so nothing you do or say anymore is private or won't be quantified and then in some way used to control your behavior or the behavior of others. So 5G, of course, means fifth generation, but when we talk about it, for the most part, I do not believe they've yet rolled out widespread the millimeter wavelength. So about 10 gigahertz all the way up to 300. But that's what you're saying. They're going to keep evolving it theoretically until they can max that out. And when you start getting around 60 gigahertz, and you can say 30, but 60, that's around the ranges that the Defense Department created their active denial systems around, which basically enable them to take these military-like installations. You can see them beamform and literally burn, the crowd. They say it just goes, on the surface of the skin, but there's antenna-like structures in the sweat ducts and pores. So it affects everything. And they could theoretically, with enough power density, kill someone with it. Mm-hmm. So the point is this is an incredible way to set up a system for total surveillance and then control of everybody remotely, even peering into our houses, et cetera, as well as even the unfortunate reality that because of programs like MKUltra, you can see them using it for mass control of the brain and the nervous system. And that's even deeper concern.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I mean, we haven't seen the widespread application of the MIMOs, which are the millimeter antennas, and they have to be very close together because 5G does not have a long signal range. So I think that this next decade is about the application, the construction, and the distribution of the MIMOs. But they're right now they're getting into sort of centralized either groups or locations like schools. I think when they open schools back up, and they likely will, schools will be wired with 5G. It's going to happen, right? Stadiums all across the country. Nobody's using stadiums now. Why? They're going to put 5G into the stadiums. So we're seeing the rollout, but it's happening in these clusters, sort of the cluster effect. And but people need to become aware of 5G, and we're flying over the target because anything 5G related gets booted off of YouTube.
Yeah, that was really alarming because when we came up with this summit last year, it was one of the more, as far as Google search trends scaling topics, even more than vaccines, which I was surprised. But now it just, went to the roof at the moment that you can't say it because, your channel will get banned or they'll censor you. So it's an indication of how important this is to their agenda.
So when is this summit coming up, and how do people attend that?
Yeah, so it's June 1st. That starts 7 days. There's an encore. And it's just the 5G summit.com. And when you register, you get access to 4 of the most amazing talks right away. It's really powerful. It gets deep into the technocratic agenda, the health risks, and what you can do. This is a worldwide call to action because we've embedded a tool in it that enables you to, within a matter of a couple clicks, access your local decision maker, elected official, and send a very strong message that you do not consent to this ubiquitous exposure that no one has studied for safety within the industry. But we have thousands of studies outside the industry that indicate clear signals of harm and worse.
Is there a sign-up page on your website right now, or is that going to come?
I think there's probably a pop-up that leads there, but otherwise it's just the5gsummit.com, and it's really an incredible event, I have to say.
Okay, I'll make sure I leave a link in the show page so people can attend that. Let's talk about the big elephant in the room, the vaccine itself, the chip mark of the beast. A lot of people are well aware of the perils of the vaccine. People are trying to figure out how they're going to deal with it. How can they not consent? Is there legal recourse? And I know you and Kelly have been on this front for a long time now. So we're coming up to that Maginot line. What can you share with people as to how they can legally or even spiritually begin to protect themselves around this vaccine?
That's a great question. So as far as right this moment, I think it's pretty clear that because of what Gates has been communicating, and it's just amazing to me this man has any relevance or gets any airtime because he has no background in health in any form. It's really that he's determining global health policy and saying the lockdown shouldn't end until the vaccine's available in 18 months that he's invested in. And the recommendations coming from the WHO, he's the number one funder now because the United States backed out. I was shocked that Trump seemingly had the power to do that. Today it was announced that we will not participate in a universal COVID vaccine program either because of this withdrawal. So there's indication that this agenda, as far as the United States, that we have something of a growing force field that's saying no. When Mike Ryan, who's director of emergencies programming for the WHO, said that they will literally come to our home and take our children and family away with these mandatory invasive tests, including temperatures, that was a chilling statement. That if people didn't see that, they should know that they declared what they're intending to do, which is the complete destruction of any protection we have to claim that our children are our own. And by the way, I've been doing this for a long time now. I have a 501c4 that I am a supporter of it's called standsforhealthfreedom.com. And it exists simply to help people locally and nationally know what their rights are, take action and say no to mandatory vaccines or stripping of exemptions. And that's really what this is about, is that no one has, we have protection because we have the Constitution. So irregardless of even emergency health executive orders, the Constitution exists as a protection against what are fundamentally, completely unethical, and I would claim they are illegal orders. Because right now in the state of Florida and other states, their statute says they can literally seize your body fluids, which means they could just take your blood test without your consent. They can vaccinate you, they can quarantine you, they can isolate you. And if you look at the history of this, by the way, it goes back to the Model States Health Emergencies Powers Act, was written in 2001, it was September, I believe, in Georgia. I think it was Georgetown University. And they basically set up a template for all the states, and I think over 30 of them have implemented these measures that basically take away your right to exempt you from these mandatory vaccines in times of health emergencies. So they were working on it for 20-something years, and here we are. They've written it into the law, and we're now seeing that we have to stand up for our rights because they will try to force tests, they will try to force isolate, quarantine, and vaccinate and medicate. And by the way, in the case of the COVID debacle, what people need to know most of all is they do not require from the World Health Organization to the US Vital Statistics Agency that any virus be tested for a coroner or any medical personnel to write COVID death on a death certificate. They only have to suspect. And that is just a fatal flaw in this entire fear-based inflation of these numbers. This is completely a fraud if they're not even requiring objective verification. And it is a travesty, if not far worse, that any organization would be considered news to be able to report these stats as if they're validated. It just blows my mind.
Yeah, they've been ginning the stats. That's pretty clear. A lot of people coming out who have had loved ones die, and they said they were diagnosed with, corona, COVID-19. It's like, well, hold on a second. They had cancer, and they expired, and this is not true. And I've read multiple cases, and then I talked about a story that I picked up on here in local radio out of San Antonio. And this woman called into the local talk show, and she did a telemedicine thing with her doctor. Her son has special needs. And the son was not part of the call. It was just her and the doctor. And she described the son's symptoms. The doctor said, well, it sounds like he's got a sinus infection. So we'll prescribe some antibiotics or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So she's like, okay. Then she gets the report back, and she sees on the reports possible COVID-19 infection under investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, what? You know, they never talked about it during the telemedicine conference, but now all of a sudden it's a statistic and it counts against San Antonio, right?
Yes. This is exactly what I was trying to communicate earlier, is that instead of looking at what they call comorbidities, where like say in Italy, they found that 99% of those who died already had pre-existing fatal chronic conditions that they were already being treated for, that half of them had 3 chronic conditions, and the average age of death was 76, and the average lifespan is 82. So these people, and so to say a particle in their body killed them when they were already sick and they were already aged is absurd. And to shut the entire world down over that, that is what is arguably the most criminal of all acts that occurred. That it was a controlled demolition of the entire socioeconomic infrastructure and superstructure of the planet. And I'm still amazed that they accomplished this.
Well, there's a lot of complicity at very high levels that allow that narrative to be pushed forward. So I just wanted to give people a quick shot at Stand for Health Freedom right here. So this, if you want to get more informed about vaccines, the danger of vaccines, where your state might be in terms of vaccination, what your rights might be, they can sign up for this on your website. Is that correct, Sarah?
Yeah, and I could just tell you too that what we are doing at Stand for Health Freedom is, if you're a pro-vaccine person, guess what? We support you too, because it's about the freedom of choice and informed consent. So that's one thing, is that people love to brand organizations like ours as anti-vax, when that's actually not what we're saying, because we're not here to take away a parent's choice. We're here to affirm that's a God-given right and responsibility, and the Constitution protects it. And it's the most basic human intuition that they should not be removing the age of consent to vaccinate down to age 9. There's a District of Columbia bill that right now is trying to do that. The American Pediatrics Association released their statement that they think the age of consent should be 12. This is a deadly intervention. Every insert says you can die from it, not to mention a litany of chronic diseases. And so for them to take away a parent's right and responsibility, there's something extremely sick and implicit about that. So call it parentectomy, call it Saturn eating his own children, right? Because we're Pluto-Saturn conjunction, right? That's where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, apparently if a 9-year-old can consent to an overage lover, then I guess consenting to their own vaccine is really just part of the overall package. That's the bonus part of the package.
That's it.
Yeah. And we can actually spend a lot of time on that, which we don't have. But the time that we do have left, I'd like to talk just a little bit about how people can stay healthy, right? We want to promote health. We want to promote immunity. And that's a really big part of your work as well, particularly your new book. So maybe for the next 5 or 10 minutes, we could just go down that chute and share with people what they can do to stay healthy and keep their body, mind, spirit online.
Beautiful. Well, one is to orient ourselves in the way that, say, Sweden did, where they intended for their healthy, law-abiding citizens to go ahead and experience getting COVID and then developing herd immunity, if you will. The whole notion of vaccine-induced herd immunity was co-opted from the natural observation that when there is a transfer of genetic information, be it viral or exosomal, that some become resilient for the rest of their life because of that challenge. And so that's really part of what we need to understand here, is that if you think about MMR vaccine, right? Why are there all these multiple boosters? Because you can't reproduce the lifelong immunity that our grandparents, for example, and some of our parents still have from having then challenged naturally with these relatively benign infectious challenges. And so to recontextualize what infection is, it's actually a way to confer immunological homeostasis and resilience. Now, if anyone wants to go deep into that topic, go to YouTube and type in mammalian virome and look at this NIH lecture by Skip Virgin. It will blow your mind to find out that some of these deadly viruses that are always in us, like say Epstein-Barr, without them, we would end up developing severe infections and or cancers, and that everything we thought about, I mean, look at measles, they use as a treatment to fight cancer, it's oncolytic, is wrong. So starting with the premise that when we build natural immunity, we're not just trying to build a better, more natural way to fight viruses. It's more to better understand that our body's default state is actually infinitely resilient, and that it's a miracle that you and I wake up in such great form as we do every day, given the lifetime of exposure we've had to novel, intensely toxic substances and electromagnetic wavelengths. This is the Anthropocene, and we're still relatively alive. So I see it kind of in a different way, which is to rather acknowledge, it's almost like in Zen, we always already are enlightened. If we can simply remove the interference and just naturally, gently detoxify, which is a word that unfortunately has been associated with quackery, when it is the fundamental method that we heal, is to remove the interference, get the gunk out of our body, and we will come back into balance and a sense of wellness naturally. Then when we look at food, because that's a big part of my book, we start to understand that food is information. And let's think about how plants that produce fruits, known as angiosperms or the flowering plants, 70% of our world's food supply depends on them still. They develop a strategy with us. Oh, you're going to help disperse our seed. We're not going to use the wind. And we're going to give you this amazing just elixir of life called fruit, for example. And the reality is that we now know that it contains exosomes, which have microRNAs, which are known to potentially control most of our gene expression, meaning that certain foods we need to be healthy. And by transitioning to this fake modern diet, we have guaranteed that our genetic infrastructure is going to fall apart. So when we look at cancer, it's not a deficiency of radiation and chemo, but it is a deficiency of fruits and vegetables and berries and plants. So when we start to contextualize it, it's not that food's just fuel. It's not that food's just building blocks for our body machine, but it's information. And the quality of the food depends entirely on the health of the soil and actually the germs that are within them. It's like this eureka moment. And we understand that we cannot really fully heal without certain healing of the biosphere and vice versa. So that's a little bit of a taste of one of the concepts in the book.
Good. Anything else you want to share with people, like attitude, belief, depressurizing from everyday stress?
I think that's the key. I mean, I've learned because of my relationship with my wife that for everything I think I know and feel, if I'm not living in my heart, which is actually quite often, because we traffic in these spaces, and there's a certain warrior archetype that comes out that I just want to run head first into the cannon fire, and it's not going to work really long term. Is that's I think how we get through this together. It's not through knowing more or trying harder, because I'm doing that all the time, and honestly, I don't think it's really having the effect I want. I think it is by living here and finding our commonality. If I can find what's common, even in what I perceive to be my enemy, and I can help humanize and maybe even give them the benefit of the doubt so that they can be redeemed, that would be beautiful. I don't want to give up hope of that, and I'm prepared to fight, tooth and nail. If someone tries to do something to me or those I love, that is obviously a violation of my basic human rights,
Yeah. Right on. Well, let's bring Steve in for a minute here, because we've got Sharon waiting in the wings, and let's just see if Steve has anything that he wants to share or have any insight into our conversation.
Here I am. You got me?
Yep.
Yeah, Jennifer Fitzgerald asked, what is Sayer G's recommendation for one thing we can easily do to improve our overall health?
It's a great question. I love that. They go all over the place. So the one thing you can do, this is in the book actually, is eat raw food of some kind with each meal. If you could do that, and it's not because I'm a raw foodist or that I believe the enzymes are necessarily, going to save your life or whatever. It's more that I've come to understand that there are quasi-immortal cells called meristematic cells in raw plant matter that confer a type of energy and information that I feel can literally revive and regenerate the entire body. And one of the suggestions I have is if you eat an organic apple instead of a full meal and start getting more into a relationship with food where you're being nourished by that light energy, it becomes like a meditation, and you simplify the normal kind of mindless ways that we eat and self-medicate. And that to me is another thing. And sometimes I suggest people try for a day. Organic apples to reset your mind, your body. And I think you will feel quite amazing, and you won't be hungry because you can eat as many apples as you want. And you're not going to eat, you're not really hungry, you'll find, if you don't want to eat another apple, but you'll get to a point where, okay, I'm hungry again, and you'll eat that apple. And that's actually a very interesting experiment that I've benefited profoundly from.
Good. Kind of a less is more. I've heard that the more you eat, the hungrier you get. And, you fast a little bit, and then say you do eat that one organic apple, then you can really feel, like you said, you get in touch with that.
Absolutely.
That's great. That's great advice.
Cool.
And also being consistent on a daily, daily practice or routine or ritual almost.
Yes.
An apple a day.
Things you do consistently.
It does. It does.
Spouts you away.
Yeah. I mean, in post-Chernobyl, they saved tens of thousands of children from radiation poisoning and death from using apple pectin. And that's just one component of apples. You could probably talk a couple hours about their benefits. They're so unique and amazing. So yeah, there's a lot of hidden additional benefits there that you don't,
Good.
Well, Sayer G, I'm glad you're on the planet right now. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
It was an honor. Thank you both. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cool.
And hopefully we'll get you back on. I know you're super busy, but we'll get you back on. And as this vaccine thing seems to accelerate,
Yes.
we got to get you back on. And
I would love to. Yeah, no, I love this. It's been great for sure.
okay, well, take good care of yourself. All right.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the work you're doing. Okay.
All right. Bye for now.